So, Berto, would you like to talk about your friend Ron?
Yeah.
What would you like to tell us?
So I had a very, 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 very close good friend that I met when I was 15 and I first moved to this country. I met him almost right away when I moved. He was not only in my school, but he was in my bus route, and he lived down the street from me. I will, spoiler alert, the punchline recently is that he passed away. And this is very recent. It was about 2 weeks ago. In fact, yeah, today's Tuesday, so it's almost 2 weeks ago. And it was not, on the one hand, it was sudden, as in, it wasn't like he was hospitalized and then, but on the other hand, he suffered from addiction issues for many years. So this was always a possibility in the back of my mind.
Yeah, and you were for the past 15 plus years one of the closest people to him, and also most of the time in charge of taking care of him through his cycle of addiction.
In the early years, for sure, yeah.
Until you drew boundaries.
Yeah.
And that, I think, changes things, because if you have a friend, but there's like family and spouses and kids that are more central to the ups and downs and the pain and the worry and that sort of thing, then that's, I think that changes things. You've gone on your own personal journey that I'm curious how you would describe it. Also, I will say that I was a friend of his because he was a friend of yours, and I became a friend. He was a friend of mine, independent of you.
Yeah, there was a time where you guys were seeing each other more than we were seeing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those in the audience, I'll describe him a Hapa like myself, half Korean, half white, and very good looking, charming.
Always impeccably dressed.
Yeah. And always knew the cool party. Like, there's guys who know cool parties, and then there's like Ron. There's Ron. He knew like where even the cool. Well, anyway, he knew the coolest of the cool parties, and also he was as obnoxious, if not more, than Humberto.
Yeah.
So he was a very outgoing and energetic and intense, and had a lot of opinions and made a lot of jokes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what do you want to tell her?
Well, so I mean, first off, it's the day I met him, I was on the lawn of my house at my mom's, and I was playing lawn golf. So I was like wearing these dorky shorts, and it was probably like a Sunday or something. And I'm sitting there hitting a little golf ball, and this would have been in September of 1990.
So you just arrived from Colombia.
Yeah, fresh off the plane. And I'm sitting there, and then this car drives by, and in the backseat of this car is this dude pointing and laughing. He's just like, ah! And I'm like, okay. And then the next day I see him in the bus, because he's in the school bus. And he's like, hey. And he like invites me to sit back with him and this other guy, Steve, in the back of the bus. And this was the cool area to sit. Because, you have that big bench seat in the back. And
why did he invite you?
I don't know. He was just like, come sit here. And then I sat back there, and we immediately started talking about stuff. And I'm pretty sure that same moment, like within the first 10 minutes of us talking, music came up. And he's like, well, what do you listen? So here's the thing. I had been in Colombia, so I didn't really know band names very much. I knew whatever was in the top 40, and I could name songs, and I could sing them with improper lyrics, but I knew all the melodies, right? And
for context, you could speak English without an accent.
Yeah, I could speak fluently, but I've never been good at lyrics.
But you had been raised in New York when you were very small,
right.
and had spoken English in the United States, for a while. So you could both speak in the Colombian accent in Colombia and the American accent in the United States.
And right away, I think he's like, well, I probably said something like, oh, I don't know, I love this. Forget the name of the band, but they do these songs, and I start singing like a Depeche Mode song. Who knows what song I said? But he's like, oh, that's Depeche Mode. And I'm like, oh, great. And then he's like, I love Depeche Mode. And then so we immediately bonded over music, specifically Depeche Mode.
It's probably master and servant, maybe, or Enjoy the Silence.
Yeah, well,
because at that time, Violator, probably, I think, was just coming out. Yeah. So I'm thinking like
one of those would have been.
If it was from your past, it would have. Master and servant was kind of their
or
big,
People Are People. Something like
People
that,
Are People. Right.
And I didn't know their like. Their best songs, I didn't actually know them. Right. I just knew the pop hits.
And just to also fast forward is you and me and Ron really bonded on a lot of Venn diagram overlapping, but also Depeche Mode love.
Specific. And I ultimately went to many Depeche Mode concerts with him and bands in that vicinity. Like we went to The Cure. That was my first concert ever, was to go to The Cure.
And I think you and I figured out that you, me, and Ron were at
that concert
before we met each other. It would have been like 90, 91
exactly.
at Key Arenas.
Yeah, we were there at the same time. And then we went to multiple Erasure shows, like many. I don't know, probably 6 different Erasure shows. Pet Shop Boys, all those kinds of things, And so and then we started hanging out, and he was my buddy. He was my closest friend in high school. I had, several friends, most of them Asian, but he was one of them, and he was also my closest neighbor. So I hung out at his house. He hung out at my house. So he
introduced you to all those other guys?
No, actually, that was funny. I
thought there was like a lunch scene or something.
That was because of Ty Verzoni.
Okay.
Who Ty it's another great friend of mine.
Another Hapa brother.
Yeah. He's half Vietnamese, half Italian. But Ron was the same grade. So Ron was 1 grade higher than me.
Oh.
And he was friends with several of the people I ended up being friends with, like Dave and Shun and stuff. But they were sort of like tangential worlds, like there was my Ron world and there was my music world. Ron did briefly join our band and then eventually didn't. So anyways, but and ever since, and our lives wove in and out, because like I went off to college, I didn't see him for a bit, and then I saw him again, then we worked together for a while, then we didn't. And he had a thing where every time he would get a new girl, generally he would sort of disappear for a while, and I'd be like, all right, well, new girl, and then he'd kind of resurface back. And then we would party. We partied a lot. We had so much fun, so many great memories. Vegas trip, lots of Canada trips, just, really fantastic memories.
So just to give y'all a little bit more nuance, hanging out with Humberto and Ron in their heyday in 2006, it was just like the energy and the loudness and the fun and the gravity that the two of you had, the gravity well that everyone just revolved around and got sucked into. And some people were very repulsed, they would get pulled into an elliptical orbit and fly right past and run as fast as they could. But someone like myself, who loves obnoxious people, was very much pulled in and enjoyed that and would join in absolutely. And there was also a lot of physicality between Berto and Ron that was playful and silly and mildly sexual, and at times though violent. Not often, but
there was that one incident that you recorded.
Yeah, there's a incident of us late at night after going to Trinity. We were probably going to a VIP. Yeah. There was like a VIP to the VIP.
Yeah, there was like little the rooms keep getting smaller and smaller. It's like a Matryoshka doll.
Yeah, and so we were at a sandwich shop right next door to Trinity. I think I can't remember what it's called, but anyway. And I was just filming you guys.
It's like falafel or something, or like a.
No, I think it was. No? It's called. I can't. It's anyway.
Okay.
And I was filming you guys goof around, and you started doing like martial arts,
like play fighting,
taekwondo kind of stuff. And then and then he got a little.
He took it a little seriously.
Yeah, and he
smacked my nose, or he smacked me in the face, hit me on the nose, and then my nose started bleeding a bit.
Right.
And I was like, ugh.
Right.
And then, but I was still, I didn't think he was, I mean, at the moment, I didn't think he was trying to hurt me. So I was like, whatever. But then we went outside, and I don't remember this as well, but you were saying that you felt that there was some actual aggression coming out.
Yeah, well, he seemed...
Oh, no, yeah, right, because, we did
Well,
talk
I mean,
about
let's just be real. Yeah. He was extremely drunk.
Yeah,
and not that you and I hadn't been drinking, but he had crossed some kind of a line, I think.
Yeah, something was hurting.
He wasn't of his right mind, and he had a lot of trauma.
He was hurting, yeah. And look, this is something I can relate to because, and I've spoken a bit about this before, but I went through my phases of... See, it's funny because most of the time that you saw me drunk, I would call that the happy drunk Berto. And, I did, but I was sort of like in a good mood generally. But there were other episodes where I would not... And it specifically was on days where I was already not feeling quite right. Like I have many memories where I would go out and I didn't actually want to go out. I was feeling sort of like down, insecure, and I wasn't sure why. And I would go out, and then in order to feel better, I'd start maybe drinking as normal, really. But like in this case, it was like not just because I was there, but also because I wanted to feel better. And then I would get too drunk, and then this dark, like demon mode, like basically bad dark Berto would come out, and the bad dark Berto would do very irresponsible things.
Yeah, you wouldn't target people the way some might. You would self-destruct.
I did though a couple of times that I regret and I had to apologize. So not all the time, but there was one time where there was this friend of mine whom I started like kind of like similar situation. I started trying to play fight them and like punch my arm, and then I'd like punch him back, and I got really aggressive with them for no good sober reason.
Okay.
So I'm not saying we were the same.
So the parallel is that you, in your early 30s, landed in therapy because you watched the Sopranos and you had a panic attack just like Tony Soprano, and you found the perfect therapist for you, which is actually quite
that was so lucky.
Coincidental.
Yeah.
And you also had your wife, who you've been with at this point today, you've been with for, Berto just dropped his bottle of water, but it had the cap on. I can tell by the look on your face because you weren't like flipping out.
Right.
But you were, as of today, you've been with your wife for 26 years, 27 years.
Something ridiculous, yeah.
And
I've lost track of time.
The two of you both, happy people, but wounded souls in your own way, have always been there for each other and been corrective for each other. Ron never had that. He had a very romantic girlfriend streak, if you will, but they would burn fast and hot.
Yeah.
And we met a lot of them and became very good friends with them. Our wives became very good friends because the six of us would hang out so often. And so that, the difference is, I think he was traumatized to a greater degree and didn't have as many protective factors available. I mean, you had your grandparents and other people that were there, and your dad was, in a lot of ways, a pretty good parent. He had his deficits, but he was good in a lot of ways. Whereas for Ron, and I don't know, and you've always been careful not to speak out of turn and tell me like what you know about his childhood, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I get the impression from Ron himself that his childhood was rough. So the two of you had a fairly parallel process there, but his was, maybe more extreme. Also, you had these protective factors and therapy, maybe in particular, and you've even said being on this podcast has helped. And he didn't have any of those things, and it was really hard for him to face. He had a lot of opportunities to face the music and to hit rock bottom and to take the opportunity to capitalize on the help that he was being either forced to do or he was engaging in. And he just never seemed to progress. He just never seemed to, crest that hill like you did. And it's this, from my standpoint, this really interesting, like sliding doors, like parallel universe thing where the two of you were so similar, but one thing led to another, and you're in completely different places at this point. You know what I mean? So I just kind of want to point that out. But this is touching something in you right now?
Yeah, because, and of course this happens. The loss comes in waves. The appreciation of the loss. As an example, the other night I went to go see Cyndi Lauper in concert, which, by the way, was actually a really good concert. But when I got home, a mutual friend had these photos that had been printed out of Ron and I. Photos of Ron and me. And
good job.
They were, just photos of us. And I was first just looking at them. And then I got super emotional, because then you just start remembering all the memories, and then you start thinking of what could have been, and the times lost, and then the times that were yet to come. And look, it's so...
Well, let me chime in on that for a second. So then you did a cameo, which we'll plug here if people want to get a holiday cameo from Berto or from Rebecca and Bob. I don't do cameo, but you can go to the website and do the other version. But you send me a cameo that you sent to someone last night, and in it, you're in this state. You had just been crying, you could tell, and you had been looking at these pictures, and you had just gone to the Cyndi Lauper concert and Time After Time song and da-da-da. And you were telling someone happy birthday, and the cameo...
Well, it was a Christmas wish. They wanted
Christmas wish.
Yeah.
And 95% of it was this very sobering outpouring of just in the moment, here and now, where you were in your grief. You weren't bawling in the cameo, but it was a very real moment. And then you sent it to me and said, check out this cameo that I sent. Yeah. Why did you want to share it with me, by the way?
I like to show you because I take pride in my cameos because I don't just I try to really put an effort into it.
Yeah, I would say the top 0.01% in terms of authenticity in that, because that's where you were in the moment.
Right. And the other thing is anytime that there's because I improv'd a little silly Christmas song.
You wrote like a song.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I coincidentally had my guitar in my hand as I was listening, and I played an accompaniment.
Oh.
It was, I think, in the key of B.
Oh, wow.
And so I just played, and it was weird because you were singing a cappella and you didn't have a guide for whether or not you were near one of the standard notes,
right.
And you were very close to starting in the key of
that's
B.
Interesting.
And you stayed in B the whole time. It was kind of weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so
actually A, sorry.
I also sent it to you because I did mention Ron, and
I'm glad you did, by the way. I think
I figured you'd appreciate it. And the other thing I've been doing is, like, people would ask me, like at work, they'd say, "How are you doing?" Meaning without knowing stuff.
Oh.
And I have been sort of refusing, in general, but not always, refusing to just be like, "Oh, I'm doing great," because I just I don't like just the casualness of lying to someone about my life. And I get that in most cases, it's just a formality, like, "Hi, how are things going?" "Oh, great. How are you doing?" I get that. But there are some cases where it just doesn't feel right. So the way I've been handling it is, unless it's the exception is if it's in a meeting with a lot of people and we're just kind of like, everyone's there, it's like, "How's everyone doing?" I'm not going to be like, "Well, let me raise my hand." But if it's just a one-on-one and someone's like, "Oh, how was your Thanksgiving?" I don't want to be like, "Oh, it's great. Everything is great." So I actually briefly mentioned, I said, "Well, Thanksgiving was really good. Got to spend time with my family." It was also a tough time because 2 weeks ago I lost a close friend. And then, of course, there's a moment of sober moment there, but I feel like it's necessary because for me, it's selfish, but I just don't want to gloss over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw this when I had my birthday party, which was planned a few months ago, or I don't know, a while ago. And it was, an event, and you arrived, and I was mindful. I even had talked to you earlier that day and said, like, if you don't want to come, I get it,
I was not going to miss your birthday.
Oh, okay. Well,
but I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I would have been okay.
And then and it was also the first time I got to see you since it happened.
Yeah. And so when you arrived, I was in a socializing mood, and but also I had half of my attention on just like I wonder how he's doing, because this is the first time we'd seen each other since Ron had died, and so you and I had some eye contact, and I was just like, how you doing, or something, and I was actually happy to see that you were authentic to yourself. You weren't just like, because I think that's something that you would be tempted to do. I think anyone would be, but I think you in particular would not want to center your vulnerability or impact other people's situations. You would try to gloss it over, and the other thing is, it's like, I think it's not necessarily a gift to others. I'll just speak for myself. To gloss over. I think it can feel, at least from my standpoint, distancing and rejecting in a way. If that's where you're at, and so for you to be real, it's just like, well, I'm just glad that you could actually be real, and it was you and I were just kind of staring at each other for like 7 seconds, and I'm just
especially
like,
if it's people you care about, because I'm gonna cry a little. Because if it's people you don't care about, I still, like I said, look, if I go to a coffee store and someone, the attendant is like, "Oh, hi, how's it going?" I'm not gonna pour out right there, right? But if it's someone I know at work or someone I know, that's the thing. And then to be there at a party, I don't want to be like, okay, this party is going to be all about me and my feelings, right? But at the same time, like what you're saying, this person, a lot of those people I don't see a lot, but when I see them, I value them. They're very nice people. We get along great. So I want to respect that too. Do not be like, oh, I'm doing great. Front. You don't know the real me at all. But I mean, none of that. It's not like I sat there and calculated it. It just felt necessary for me to just say the briefest amount of it. And then, of course, another person that was there, Chong, also knew him, not well, but knew him for a long time. And so it would have also been weird and he actually, I don't know if he had heard.
Yeah. So I was wondering about that, because it was interesting, because so you called me that day that you found out, and we talked about it for a long time, and then
I really appreciate, by the way. That was super helpful.
Okay.
Super helpful.
Good.
Yeah.
How was it helpful?
Because so far, like that. Okay, that day, I was in bed for like 3 hours, feeling really sick.
Oh, really?
Well, after I found out.
Oh, okay.
Like I was in a meeting, a virtual meeting, and I got the text.
What did it say?
It was a pretty direct text from a mutual friend telling me what had happened, just that he was dead. And it was shocking.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty paralyzed. I got through the meeting. I wasn't presenting or anything. I just got through the meeting, and then for some reason decided to take one more meeting, because I had one more meeting after that. And I was a zombie through that meeting. And then luckily that was the last meeting of the day.
That's like, meetings are what, like an hour?
These were half-hour meetings.
Okay.
But still, it was like what I should have done after I found out is like, I'm sorry, I have to go. But I don't know. I just
No, I think it's right.
And then I ended, and then I felt sick. I just got in bed. I was super,
like throwing up. Sick?
No, just and I, because of the thyroid stuff, some days I feel bad anyways. But this was different. This was like I felt Yeah, sick. Okay, like specifically, I felt dizzy and I felt cold, and just like I just wanted to lay down.
Okay.
So I laid down and I was just.
Had you talked to anyone?
Not yet. Well, other than a brief text exchange with the person that told me. And I think I might have gotten a call from Ron's son, I think.
And for context, Ron's son is mid-late 20s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so talking to you was actually the first person I was able to have a moment of like
Oh, really?
conversation that was helpful. Because and I got to cry a bit because I hadn't cried until I talked to you. I hadn't cried.
Oh.
And crying, as we know, can be very helpful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's hard for me too. I wasn't nearly as close to him as you were,
but you knew him. You knew
but
him.
I cared about him, and I always thought of him as he would have been a good therapist, actually.
Yeah.
When he was in his calm or less extroverted mode, he was very thoughtful and
Very good listener.
Yeah, he was a good listener, and he would pay attention. He would remember things. You know what I mean?
He was very attentive in that sense. And also, you and I saw him together the last time I saw him
Yeah.
in this world.
Yeah.
And we had a good night that night.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of poignant because we saw The Room, the movie that is so bad it's good.
We saw him one more time after that.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, April 30th.
You and me?
Yeah, for our mutual friend's birthday, who our mutual friend didn't show. But
Oh, right.
yeah. And
But
then
didn't we saw another movie?
Yes, we saw Civil War.
We saw Civil
But we
War.
first had dinner.
That's
then we
right.
saw Civil War.
Yeah, and I guess that's a little poignant too. We went to the Hawaiian restaurant that I love. Kona Kitchen.
Kona Kitchen.
Golly.
That's right.
But the Linwood
Kona Kitchen,
the Linwood
and
version.
And had a good time there. My brother was there as well. So it's good. At least I have this very nice couple back-to-back memories of seeing him.
Yeah.
Doing things we loved, seeing fun movie. Well, Civil War was a difficult movie because it's so poignant. But, just spending time together.
But much less time than usual, which
Yeah. And then sadly that was the last time I saw him because after that
So when you had called and told me, well, first off, you texted and said I got to talk.
Yeah.
Actually, weren't we scheduled to podcast?
That's right. That night we were going to podcast.
Yeah. So you texted me and you said something like, "Ron has gone away" or something. It was some. Yeah. And there was a small part of me that thought, wait, is he saying that he's dead? And I said no. It's that. And then you said, call me, or
Yeah.
And so I called you,
That's right.
and then you told me, and I was like, whoa. And for both of us, we've had a lot of conversations for years now about the reality that, given his alcohol addiction and the severity of his binge drinking, which was quite possibly the highest level you could ever achieve as a human and not die immediately. I mean, the physical toll it was taking on his body, and that you and I had reckoned with that reality, but it was weird because I had 15 years ago, actually, or 13 years ago, had accepted, given what he was telling me about the physical toll that drinking was having on his body, on his liver, and he had been hospitalized. He was in like critical condition. I don't know. It was like, and this was like this was 13 years ago, and he had continued to binge drink this whole time, in that severe way. Like he would binge drink for 3 to 7 days and would not remember a single thing from the entire event. You know what I mean? And I just thought, well, it's just a matter of time. I mean, if there's anyone that's ever been at risk of dying from this, it's him, whether it's from liver failure, organ failure, or car crash or something. So when you told me, there was a half of me that was just like, well, yeah. And also he lasted longer than I thought he would. But another half of me was like, what?
That can't be.
This doesn't make any sense, We just saw him.
I had a very similar feeling in that part of me for many, many years. I mean, no, quite specifically, there were many times where I feared that he had died somehow because, there were many times where I didn't hear from him and I didn't know where he was. And, there was this one horrible time that I was driving. It was like midnight or 1 a.m. and I was driving to where he lived at the time because I was trying to see if he was alive. And I remember just this horrible feeling that I thought I was going to arrive to a dead body, and luckily in that case it wasn't, but he was still, extremely bad.
Yeah.
But so I had that thought of but at the same time it's weird. It's like, yeah, but what? Both feelings present in my mind at the same time.
I'm trying to remember what So anyway, when you called me, I was kind of in shock myself, and I was just listening to you talk about the details, or when you found out, or what you knew, or your sort of initial thoughts and feelings. Mm-hmm. But then after a while, I remember I just randomly started reflecting. And there was something that I said that you were just like, whoa, that's doing something to me. And do you remember what it was? Because it wasn't on purpose. I wasn't trying to, I was just speaking out loud. I was thinking out loud, and there was something you were like, whoa, like I hadn't thought of that. Or
I don't remember the specifics. All I know.
Maybe it was like your parallel traumas.
Oh, yeah. That's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was. That we had, and it's kind of like what you were touching on earlier.
You're like connected,
yeah,
and took these different directions.
Yeah, that's right. You were telling me that I was probably going to feel a lot of feels because there's so many layers to our connection,
right?
And that it's not just that we know each other for a long time. It's not just that he was my first.
I mean,
friend
it sounds funny, and I think I might have even said this. You're kind of like trauma brothers, and I don't mean that as a
no, absolutely. And one of the tragedies is that sadly we never really talked about it.
I think he had both of you had a hard time back in the day, but I think he had a really hard time talking.
Look, the way I know that his trauma was in fact deeper and worse, however you can categorize these things, is that I don't even know the extent of his trauma.
But what category it's in, right?
Yeah, some of it, but it was so painful for him.
Yeah.
That he couldn't even tell me everything. Yeah. And according to some of his other loved ones, he couldn't talk about it in therapy very easily at all. And that's some other level of, because I remember my experience, and granted, and it's also part of my personality is very open book in general, right? But as we've talked in the past, when I first started opening up in therapy about what was in fact childhood traumas, at first it was sort of the opposite of not talking about it. It was brushing over it, kind of quickly.
You had the facts down, but you didn't have the meaning down.
Not at all. And it was it's kind of this weird way of not wanting to talk about it.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, yeah, I'll tell you. Oh, sure, I'll narrate my life story like it's a Lifetime movie. But I didn't feel at all. I didn't feel it. And so my therapy wasn't like, come on, tell me what happened. My therapy was, come on, feel what happened.
Yeah.
And that took me, I don't know, like a decade. And even just for some of the trauma, I feel, it seems that sadly, tragically, he might not have gotten at all to that point.
Yeah.
And
that was just from my distant perspective, the defense that he developed, I think, when he was very, very young, like pre-verbal or something. And I don't even know if his abuse goes back that far, but I'm guessing it does on some level.
Yeah.
That he had a defense of just utter annihilation or just the most intense, overwhelming pre-verbal shame that you could ever experience. And he just couldn't even begin to even acknowledge to himself. And I think from what you would say, I think he would answer a question in the affirmative if you said have you been through trauma?
Yeah.
But it was so buried underneath all these defenses of just like, I'm just not going to go there. Or an inability to go there, or so painful that it was like, well, maybe later, I'll get to it later, or something like that. But the drinking was developed, at the very least, in all likelihood, from an attempt to numb those feelings.
Yeah.
And that cycle. And I remember that was what my hope was after that. Oh, I'll just, I don't know if you can tell me if you want me to edit this out, but what happened 13, 14 years ago was that his liver had stopped to function, and he filled his entire torso had filled with fluid. Mm-hmm. And he was in a very dire medical emergency and had gone to the emergency room, and they had kept him in the hospital for a bit, and they had to drain his torso of all this extra fluid, with some kind of a tube or a syringe or something. And it was a wake-up call for him. He had wake-up calls before, but this was a significant one, and this is when he and I were hanging out a lot, just him and me, without you. And he was telling me all about it, and he was saying that he's going to stop drinking, and he's and I know enough as a clinician even back then just to kind of casually, I wasn't assessing, but I would just kind of casually ask questions to just get a lay of the land. I guess maybe emotionally for myself, just to kind of know, like, what am I, do I need to prepare myself?
Right.
And I remember I asked him questions to get at his commitment to forever being sober, to abstain forever, because that's kind of that's a litmus test for where someone is in their recovery. Because if someone just had a major negative event, it's fairly easy, or it's relatively easy for an individual to commit to the near future, to say,
got it.
I am not drinking.
Right.
And then if you say forever, then something else will happen where they're like, well, we'll cross that bridge. Whereas the right answer to that question, or the healthy answer, or what you would hope to hear is, no, I'm never drinking. This is over. I can't ever touch that. I've tried to cut back. I've tried to, because he had already by that point. And so I'm never drink. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to succeed at never drinking again.
But that's the commitment.
But that's the only answer here. And I need to, in fact, Kirk, do not drink around me.
Sure.
And hang out with me sober, and please, like, I've seen that, and even then you don't know what's going to happen. The other thing that I was casually asking around was, is he committed to the psychological trauma recovery that would need to parallel his alcohol recovery? And he was not. He was like, nah, I'll be okay. That kind of attitude. And I was like, oh no. If this didn't provoke him, I don't know if anything could provoke him.
My experience parallel to that was that for many, many years, even well after that, that was always my experience. These horrible incidents would happen, and then him and I would have a very, for me, unsatisfying, superficial conversation about it. And I could just tell he just didn't want to talk at all, right? But when we would, I was aware of that. I was waiting for that conversation where he was saying what I would want to say.
Right.
And it just never came. The first time that I finally started hearing the language that I sort of thought, it's like, okay, that's the baby steps of what I think you need to be, was in it was like, I think in 2019 or something like that. Like I remember having one or two conversations where I'm like, okay. And then there was one other one like in 2022 where one conversation where I'm like, okay, I really think he might but apparently it was still not enough.
And along these lines, after that point, I personally, in that moment or in that week or something, or especially when I found out that he had binged like a month later or something, I emotionally had to distance myself.
Yeah.
Not out of punishment to him or disgust or anything, just like to protect myself, because I was like, because I thought it's just a matter of weeks at the time.
Right.
Because I actually talked with another mutual friend who knew Ron kind of, and I had asked her, as a medical professional, what's the outlook? And she was like, not good.
Yeah.
It could, the next time he drinks, he could die. And
so you were already thinking, like in your head, that this was something that could happen at any time, really.
Yeah. And it seemed like it was going to happen sooner than later. So I was just like, I can't, if I get involved emotionally, and we don't really have that relationship anyway, like the way you did with him, then it's just going to be me, banging my head against a brick wall, and I'll be there, and I'm friends, and if he wants to talk, I'm here, and and we would have those kind of conversations. But I was like, this train is going down the tracks, and I'm terrified. And so when I would talk with you, so you you're better friends with him, and so you would occasionally download to me, like,
because during those first few years, I was very involved. I was always trying to go. Not that I already, from the very beginning, I had no illusions that I would magically be able to save him from himself. But I was trying to be like, oh God, he's drinking. Okay, I'm gonna go try to like help him or get to the hospital, whatever. And then also, I was trying. I will admit that in my head, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the thing I could say to him to maybe like trigger him into like stopping, and I did that for several years.
And it was very stressful for you.
Oh, dude. So what ended up happening is there was a moment at which it's like 2 a.m. in the morning. I am considering one of these life and death situations. I'm super stressed, and I'm thinking, man, I have a little baby at home. I have a little kid at home. I'm out here, and this is like ruining my life in a way. And so it was after that I had a conversation with him when he sobered up, of course. I had a conversation, and I explained. I said, hey, I'm here for you if you are sober. I'm here for you for anything. Like, let's hang out. Let's live our lives. And I really thought in my head what I was committing to. So I'm like, I was going to make even more time available to hang out with him. Like, let's just do it, right? Somewhat naively, but I was also thinking, because maybe if he has more positive sober experiences, But either way, I told him, but I'm no longer here to rescue you.
Yeah. But that didn't end it, because
it didn't end
for years later, to maybe a lesser extent, any of his girlfriends, of which he would go through girlfriends every couple years-ish, they had your number on speed dial.
Yeah, I just never showed up again. I would tell them, things that I still did a few times after that was call 911.
Oh, really? So all the way back then?
Yeah.
When your first daughter was born, that's when...
Not born. She was already... No, because this went on for a few years.
That's what I'm saying.
So I was actively involved for the first, maybe 4 years.
Yeah, because I remember we would have conversations, and I remember, a few times I would listen to you, and then I would inevitably say, kind of speaking to myself, because I would get kind of hooked a little bit, but also to you of, look, Berto, until you see the following things from him, independent of you trying to coerce him or pressure him or whatever, until you see these 2 or 3 things, he's lost in the woods, and the thing that I probably said was, until you see him on his own volition going to AA every day and loving it, and maybe going to therapy as well and loving it,
so much that it makes me sick. Where I'm like, oh my God, you're brainwashed.
And he's been sober and recovering psychologically and in addiction for 12 months. Consistently. Maybe there's a relapse in there, but he sticks with whatever treatment program he's on until that threshold is crossed. Then he's still lost in the woods, and it's just as pessimistic as it's ever been. And I again, I'm saying this to myself because it's so tempting, and there's probably listeners that have been in these shoes, maybe are in these shoes now. It just feels so tempting. You want to believe that there's hope, and that the person will turn it around, and they'll give you these little indications, like they went to one AA meeting, or they're talking about going to AA, or they went to one therapy session, or they were forced by the law to go to intensive outpatient, and they're going, but you don't know if they really want to be there, or they haven't drank for 3 weeks. That's a sign, and you get your hopes up. And I'm not saying you're not supposed to have hope, but to get entangled in that up and down, it's just emotionally
I was
horrible.
Totally entangled for about 3 to 4 years. So it was about 10 years ago where I had that conversation. And when I had that conversation, he understood, but it was one of these things where even if he had been like, well, but what if, which he didn't, but even if he had, I just couldn't do it. And not only that, I had already been through a different but related thing with my father,
Right. So that's another thing we talked about on the phone.
That's right.
Was another parallel, another massive, I don't know what you call it, like
connection,
bigger meaning to all of this is that your dad had similar issues growing up, and it was very different, of course, but
but the similarities were me trying to somehow save him and always there for him. Oh, another emergency. Okay, well, let me see. And then especially when I was younger, I all the time would be thinking, okay, what could I say to him? What could I do? I can turn this around. I got this. I can save him. And it took me a long time and therapy to be able to also lay down some boundaries that I could stick to and be like, and not only that, but come to the sad realization that I can't save him. That as much as I love him, I can't save him.
And it's not your responsibility.
And that it's not my fault or responsibility.
It's not your fault.
And that's hard, right? And so I had a similar, shortened, but a similar process with my friend, with Ron. Because I was in the, initially, of course, with any friend, if you hear someone's even if it's something that they did to themselves, of course, you're going to rush, you're going to try. But after 4 years, it was too much for me. And like maybe if I hadn't had the experience with my father, I wouldn't have known how to cut that off.
I feel, I don't know. This just popped in my head. I feel it necessary to point out that video that I took of the 3 of us going out happened before he had that event, before either one of us knew that he had big of an alcohol problem. That's right. I just feel like I want to point that out.
No, that's right. No, because
we wouldn't have drank with him after that point.
Right. Look, I didn't realize I never at the time thought I had a drinking problem, but I had a social intermittent drinking problem that I didn't realize. That, and is what I was describing earlier, that sometimes I was trying to numb myself with alcohol in social situations, but still. And then in those times, I would do very irresponsible things. So if and that was my thing, right? But if I look back, I'm like, oh, right, he was doing that too. But I didn't know at the time where it was going to lead or anything. Anyways, so yeah, lots of connections, lots of entanglement, and it took a lot. Now, what I will say is that after that, there were both good and bad aspects of it. The good part is that I really did stop showing up, in those emergencies. I did. There were a few times where I called 911 because like no one had seen him. So I'm like, hey, look, wellness check on this person. But so on that side, that helped my emotional side because I didn't feel as entangled. The downside is whenever I would see him and we'd have great times, because we still ended up having great memories and great times. We never had really deep conversations about this. And it's not that it was my role to have those conversations with him. I'm just sad.
Well, are you saying because it was this inherent barrier to authenticity that
yes,
the two of you were just avoiding talking about this previous event? You're like, let's just act like that didn't happen, and it sort of drives a wedge.
That's right. And then when I did try, it was clear that he didn't want to. Until, like I said, those couple times way more recently, but for years after that, I would see him and we'd have a great time, but with this shadow, with this dark beast in the corner.
So in Al-Anon, they'll talk about detachment, about the solution for yourself and for the person suffering from addiction is to detach. And there's a lot of different philosophy and advice and nuance to what detach means. But what do you think it means given what you went through?
Well, given the word and what I went through, I would imagine it is basically, start cutting some of the emotional tie that is connected to the trauma that they're going through, so that because it's like if you're seeing your child suffer, it's impossible as a parent to not suffer with them. And then, so if you're seeing a friend suffer through addiction and you're there the whole time, it's impossible for you not to feel all that suffering. So I'm guessing it's trying to detach from that so you don't have to suffer with them.
Is it also distancing? Because that's different from detachment.
Well, in my experience, so I don't know if I did it right, but what I will say is that anytime, like I did stay true to my word as much as I could. Anytime he was like, hey, let's go to a concert, let's go to a movie. Like anytime I was there and we had those memories, and when we were together, I didn't judge him or treat him poorly or anything. But I also didn't like, dude, I'm not, what I didn't do is like, no, I'm not seeing you until we talk about this, or like see him and be like, okay, we're not having fun until we sit down and have a 3-hour conversation about what happened last time. I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I did it right, but for my sake and my sanity, I did what I could.
From the outside, you did it exactly right. I mean, I could go into the details of the markers, but you had all the markers of someone that did it right, meaning that you were in contact, you weren't punishing him, you weren't like, I'm gonna punish him with my distance because of what he's done to me, or maybe he'll wake up and stop drinking. It's that fusion with the addiction that is, at the very least, just suffering for someone in your position, and at worst can actually make the addiction perpetuate to some extent because you're creating this toxicity around it.
Well, and it's super sad because even till the end, he didn't understand this. I say this because when I saw his mom, which was so hard, she's known me since I was 15 as well. And she was telling me like that even recently, when he was talking to her, he was expressing a great amount of remorse about how, in quotes, how he treated me and how, and in fact, one of the last text exchanges with him was him apologizing to me in October, he sent me a very apologetic text.
For what exactly?
For not being there for me and for canceling our plans and for the way he put it, for everything he's put me through. Now, so it's interesting. That's what I would want to hear after someone's actually in full real what do you call it? Recovery and going through and be like, okay, great, you're actually owning up for what happened. But I think what was unclear to him, sadly and tragically, was that none of us that love him and were close to him, we weren't like sitting there pissed off that he didn't show up to the concert. We were crying and sad for him and wishing that something would trigger in his head.
Well, and I won't speak for you, but I think this is how it was for you. It was how it was for me, that he wouldn't show up to a majority of things. There were things that, Ron and me, we're on your short list of invitees to things. And so...
And to be clear, Ron, like you, back in the day, but even still, he tried... He's a planner, and he was an instigator constantly.
Yeah.
I've talked about this. I'm terrible. I'm like the worst friend in this regard. I just don't plan things. But Ron would always invite me to stuff. Yeah. Always.
Well, he was literally a what do they call it?
Party planner.
A promoter.
Promoter, yes.
Yeah. It was his job to get people to come to shit.
Right. But even before he was a promoter, even in high school, like our first Christmas, we got each other the Phantom of the Opera CDs. And then he was like, "Oh, they're coming to the show's coming." So we went together, and then he'd be like, "Oh, The Cure's coming." Like he would tell me,
and going out with him was like this movie or something. Whether it was in Vancouver, BC, or Seattle or somewhere, he was always like, "Okay, let's start here," and then we'd go there, and then we'd do something, and then he'd be like, "Okay, so across town there's this other thing, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be like really hopping."
And then I have a friend at this place. And we're gonna,
So we'd go there, and then he'd run into like 3 or 4 people, and they'd get us backstage or whatever, and then we'd hang out there, and then all of a sudden he'd come around the corner, and he'd be like, let's go somewhere. We're like, huh? Oh, okay. And then we'd go to some like private party just out of town. And it was just, all this, like stuff that you and I, but anyway, my point is that he, most of the time, so you would, the 3 of us would do things, and a lot of the time it was just you and me, and he wouldn't show. Yeah. And so it's interesting that he would apologize for that. I didn't know that he was acknowledging it.
That started in the last few years.
Okay,
it took a long time, but again, what I wish. Look, when he passed, I started getting so many messages from people that I barely know, but 2 things stood out to me. First of all, how many people out there knew that I was such a good friend of Ron's? Even though I barely know, or I barely saw or knew these people, because Ron would always talk about me, and it's like so touching and humbling. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. And you've talked about Ron on this podcast many times, whether the listeners are noting it or not. I would say 30-40% of the time would actually say Ron, but another larger percent, you would talk about Ron. I knew you were talking about Ron.
Say a friend of mine,
but you wouldn't say Ron. Right. So you talked about him.
But basically, it's just incredible that because the context, a lot of these cases, him having his part, things I didn't even go to, like all these events, all these great experiences, and he still thought of me. Like that's so touching. That's the first thing. The second thing is how many people were like, "Oh my God, Ron was like the best person. He was so kind. He did this for me. He did this thing. He saved our relationship. He did this." Like these incredible stories out of the woodwork of this person that had this huge network of people. And tragically, I don't know that he knew that. That he knew how many people cared. And
I don't think he did.
Yeah, and so
because that wasn't his that wasn't his persona. It wasn't what he was known for. But
yeah,
I guess it is kind of tragic that he didn't know that.
Like, we all have dark sides. There's certainly things about Ron that upset me from time to time, but it's just that aspect that it's sort of a trope to say, oh, well, you never know how many people you've touched. But in his case, I have empirical evidence, and like the number of people already saying, when is there going to be a big celebration of life event? I'm going to fly in to go to, that kind of thing. Okay. And so he, with me, we had some conversations, but I feel in his mind, a lot of it was shame of like, oh, I've let Berto down. I've let Berto down. And I couldn't quite get across to him. I'm like, man, listen, I don't care about that right now.
Right.
I'm not mad.
Yeah.
Especially after, maybe I'm sure I was mad initially about it. But then after I started seeing like, oh, yeah, this is like this weird infection virus that's taking hold of him.
It's something that he doesn't have control over.
Yeah. Once I saw that, I stopped being mad and I was just sad. And I'm like, tragedy on top of tragedy. So what I just wanted him to get help and fix,
and I think that's more evidence that he was still far from recovery. It's good that he was acknowledging, but it's interesting that the vibe of his acknowledgement was as if he doesn't have this massive, uncontrollable addiction,
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that, which is that it's like, you invite me to your birthday. I don't show. I don't tell you I'm not showing. And when you text me, I'm like, oh, hey, are you still coming? I don't reply to you. And then weeks later, I feel terrible about it and I apologize to you. And you're like, what happened? I was watching TV. I didn't want to stop watching my movie. And I'm so sorry. Like, okay, I definitely owe you a freaking apology.
Yeah.
Maybe more than one apology. But if you found out I got in a car hit me or a piano fell on my head or something.
Or you had cancer.
In the hospital, whatever.
You had like terminal cancer.
I mean, I might still apologize, but that's the last thing on your mind.
Right.
Like, oh my God, wait, what? Like, forget my party. Like, how are you doing? Like, right? And that's how I felt. So yeah, that's a really good point that text I got in October, in fact, my reply reflects that disconnect, which is because he sent me I don't want to read it, but he sent me a text in October that was about how he owes me a lot and he owes me an apology and he owes all these things, and that will come. And then I said, look, don't worry about it. Like, just focus on healing and stuff, right? But what you're pointing out is so true, which is that if he had seen the other side, he might have actually said, hey, how are you doing? Here's what I'm currently doing, just so you know, because I'm sure you've been thinking about me. I'm currently doing this. I'm in this recovery. I'm in the therapy and stuff. I would love to see you. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
That wasn't quite there yet.
Yeah. Or, I hey, best friend of mine, I'm sorry that I didn't show, and I've done it many times. I feel bad. And I now realize that I have a disease. I have an addiction that is completely out of my control. And although I do feel bad that I did it to you, you have to understand like where I was coming. I'm not making excuses, but I was in a rough situation. And
we had one conversation this year that gave me the slightest glimmer of hope, which was a conversation over the phone. Unfortunately, he wasn't fully sober, but he was not saying, I'm sorry. He was saying, I don't know what to do. And I did think that was a change. I was like, okay, that's a start of something.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not soon enough or whatever. And I gotta say, I found this note. So him and I went to the same high school, and my future wife at the time, who was not my wife at the time, we also went to the same high school. Not only that, we were in a class together We were in calculus together. So he knew her at the same time I knew her. We met at the same time. I never dated her in high school. He didn't date her in high school. But he did sign her yearbook in 1992. And it was such a hilarious note. I'm not going to read it because, it's not right. But I will summarize because it was so Ron. He told her that, it was great meeting her. And he told her that she's too happy. Like he said, oh, you're always so happy. And then he said, but you're too happy. And I'm afraid one day you're going to go on a killing spree with a big smile on your face. Like he got into like an American Psycho darkness. And it was just so him. But I found that note. I had never read it. I don't think my wife had ever read it because it was just buried in the yearbook. And, if it's not someone you at the time know really well, you don't like scroll through everything. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it was finding a time capsule. You know? And so, but that's the thing is our lives are our memories pretty much. Like we have our memories of who we are, who we've touched, who we've talked with and spent time with. And he is as much a part of my life as any family member. Yeah. Because other than my wife, I think my wife and my kids, obviously, but it's incredible. He's a brother, Yeah. And like you're saying, trauma brothers. It's just, I wish we had a chance to go to that level of closeness that we could have actually talked to each other about our traumas.
It wasn't closeness. You were close. Yeah. It was him.
Yeah.
He just, the trauma was so severe. It was just so severe for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well. I will always love him.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing with me and the listeners.
Yeah.
How does it feel to talk about?
I never regret talking. Well, rarely do I regret talking about things. It feels good. I like a couple things. One is I like that I get to speak out loud about how he touched my life in positive ways. Selfishly, I also like that I get to speak about how hard it was for me during some of these times. And I also, I think it's important for people that are struggling with similar situations, either themselves or with friends or loved ones, that they're not alone. Meaning that other people go through these things. And I personally have found it always useful to hear perspectives of people that have gone through similar experiences because I can relate, and then you can not. At least in my case, I feel less alone. Like okay, someone out there. I mean, there are letters that people send us where I'm like, oh wow, they also go through this, and it feels good. It feels like you are a part of a community rather than just an island. So even though it's tragic and even though it had the worst outcome in a sense, like no recovery, I feel like it's useful for folks to hear that these things happen, how people process them, how, so hopefully it helps someone out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So if people want to write in, just put in the subject line, to Berto or to Humberto. Stacy will forward those emails directly to Humberto if it's clearly in the subject line or in the first sentence or something. And so go to the website, fill out the contact form if you want. The thing that I have confidence in for you, Berto, is that you will have you're saying selfishness, I will say meeting your own needs or taking up space.
Yeah.
Is that the process of grieving as it comes.
Yep.
Because I've never seen you in this state, I guess fortunately, because we haven't really had to. And the authenticity and the permission you give yourself to grieve as it comes, I think is a good sign. I feel like I don't need to mess with that at all.
I don't think, by the way, I don't think selfishness is a bad word always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to clarify that. I don't know. I guess I feel some self-consciousness that my friend is the one who died, but I also have things to talk about that are about my feelings about it and my experiences.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by selfish. But I don't mean it necessarily in a negative way. I just mean like, yeah, some of this is about me. And anyways.
Yeah. And you've already been putting yourself aside, I think, at times when it probably is the right thing to do, like when you're with his son.
Yep.
And there's chaos going on around you.
That's right.
Which you've already experienced, actual people screaming at each other and whatnot. And so you weren't stepping into the middle of that and saying like, what about me? You have a sense of like when to put yourself forward and when not to. But also, Berto, there's a time for rebuilding that also will spontaneously emerge for you.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that back and forth?
So I've had a few weird experiences in the last few days that I've talked out loud to myself about because I at least was aware that they were weird. Weird is a charged word, but they were unusual. So on Sunday, I went for a drive by myself. And I listened to songs that meant a lot to Ron and me. One of them was Sailing the Seven Seas by OMD.
Can I ask you, what inspired that? What did you notice inside of you to motivate you to do that?
At first, it was just a pragmatic decision to... so as you are well aware, I have this guilty pleasure parked in my garage, and it has a battery that drains if I don't drive it. So I was driving my car, but I didn't realize that I actually needed that alone time. And two things, I actually have this deep connection to driving or being in a car and Ron. Number one, in high school is when you start driving or being driven. And Ron had access to a car before I did because my mom started lending. But first of all, he was older, so he was driving first. And they were a lot more lenient with lending him a car than at first I had. So he was driving me a lot. And I just have so many memories of that, of him driving, us talking, listening to music. That was so much of my high school. So that's one thing. Second, as you know, Depeche Mode has a song about driving with your best friend, and we would listen to that song.
And that's about drug addiction.
And it is. And I hope he never lets me down again.
And a fair amount of the songs that are about addiction or even about love are actually about alcoholism because Martin Gore struggled with, but not tonight.
Exactly. So I have that, and the road trips, when we had these girlfriends in high school that lived very far away, and he would drive us to go see them. And it's just like so many connections. So there's that. And there's the music. And that song, Sailing the Seven Seas, was a song that we listened to together. It was the summer. It was the summer after he graduated. I was still in high school.
How does that one go again? OMD is, I never had an OMD. I just knew the main hit that they had, If You Leave, which I loved.
This is more like a summer hit, I'm so in love with you that I don't know what to do. Anyways, very fun song, and I just have this memory of us in that summer driving, singing our hearts out to that song, right? So I listened to that. I also listened to some Phantom of the Opera.
Where did you drive?
I just went on, on the freeway for a bit. I did some loops, nothing specific, but so anyway, so that happened on Sunday. That was, I'd say, that one actually wasn't weird. That one was just an intense, necessary thing. I cried a bit, and I felt it, Then yesterday...
Did it also feel like honoring?
Yeah, absolutely. Just
I think that's a big part of it. Even though you might not believe in an afterlife or something, it feels like a ceremony, if you will, like a statement that maybe even you're just saying to yourself.
Well, absolutely. And what I believe is left behind is the pattern of the person. The pattern meaning the memories we have, the butterfly effects that they created. And yes, and I view that as a way of honoring.
I'm writing a book about grief, and so I'm just going to take a little note here because I don't have a little bit on this that I want to remind myself later about how we grief. We do things. This is going to be a silly sentence. We do things to show that it matters.
Yes.
Like Berto driving around.
Yeah. If you want, I can write up a little paragraph or something, send it to you with details. But either way,
because to just give other examples, like when Wyatt died, you know, in the military, he drank a lot. Not to be in this, this sort of theme of today's episode, but his, in the special forces, they play hard and they work hard.
Yeah,
and they wouldn't drink or anything when they were in theater, and they, as a group, would go several times, Afghanistan, Iraq, and they were always in the thick of it. They weren't in the back with the supplies. They were right there in battle,
of course,
working alongside the local forces, training the local forces, and being shot, being injured.
Extreme high stress, constant.
Yeah. And then they'd come back stateside, Tacoma, and they would just drink and drink and drink. And, some of those times you were with us. And so when he died, it was it felt appropriate that all of his friends would drink a lot. And whenever there is a commemorative moment like his birthday or something, it always involves some ceremonial drinking. There might not be the sort of over drinking that occurred afterwards, but there's a hefty shot of whiskey that everyone takes or whatever, and it feels like, and even when I or others are not in the mood to drink, it feels like, well, this one's for him, and it's kind of weird because it's like, so you're saying that he would want us to like punish ourselves, no, but there is something like that. Like if someone decided to just walk, like with Forrest Gump.
That's right. That's true.
When he started to run, there's a line there between like self-punishment and flogging yourself, but there's a zone there of like, I am kind of putting myself through something within reason, and it's not necessarily pleasurable, but it is a showing to either the universe or to God or to them in the afterlife or to myself or I'm sure there's a lot of literature written about this informally, you know what I mean? But it's not something that I see in the grief literature. And so when you went for the drive, there's some kind of pointing about, it's a commitment, it's showing, giving the time, it's, in the past and today, and if you were religious, you would involve yourself in some sort of religious ceremony, like fasting. That's another thing. Or to stay up all night, or to give up a certain food, or to pray for 10 hours straight, or to not talk for 7, the sitting Shiva, this sort of thing. There's a commitment you're showing, like this matters, and I'm demarcating the grief. I'm physically manifesting the grief. I'm behaving the grief. I'm showing to myself and to the world, I'm going to wear black for the next 3 years, and even if I want to wear something different, I'm just going to do it because I'm committed. But there's a line there because, you could end up punishing yourself, or you could go along with a cultural script that is actually even misogynistic or harmful or something. But it is kind of interesting that without those, Americans are the most devoid of cultural traditions because we come from so many different places, and we also are actively rejecting and eschewing tradition in a lot of ways in religion. But it leaves these big holes.
Right.
But it's just very healthy of you to just spontaneously step into that, because there isn't a tradition to follow for you. But you felt it in the moment, and you went with it.
That's true. And even on Saturday. So on Saturday, I was going to go help the son with some stuff, and I think I listened to all of Music for the Masses and all of Violator in the car, just driving, cause
Depeche Mode for those.
Yeah. But yesterday was where something weird happened that I was aware that it was odd. I didn't eat lunch, and it started getting later, and it was like 3:00. And I was hungry. I was very hungry. I'm like, I need food. And I wasn't doing it on purpose. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go get some food. So I got in the car and I started driving to go get food. And I kept being like, I went to Metropolitan Market. I walked in. Nothing sounded good. Like, they have a salad bar. They have a sushi thing, the sandwiches. Nothing sounded good. I looked around. I walked out, got in the car, started driving. I'm like, I'll just go somewhere else. And I drove, and I'm like, that doesn't sound good. And I just kept driving, and time just passing, and I'm like, what am I doing? I felt so lost, and I was aware. But so I was aware. I was like, I'm sure this is not unrelated. This can't be. So I was talking a little bit to myself. I'm like, okay, you're doing this. You should get some food, like I was trying to talk a little bit to myself out loud. I mean, like literally.
Is part of it that if you go home, you're a parent, you're a husband, you're in your routine, it'll pull you into the normalcy of life?
It wasn't even that, because there was no one home at the time. This was in the middle of the workday. I had no more meetings for that day. I did have to pick up my kid at later but it was like 2 hours later. So I had time. Oh, yeah. No one was waiting for me somewhere. But in my head, I literally just needed food. I'm like, I just need to eat. And I kept driving, and I drove, and repeatedly decided, no, that doesn't sound good. Then I went, without really planning it, I went back to places that we would have eaten. There was this one pho place that was our favorite pho place for my other friend and I, and then he came with us many times, and it was no longer exists, but it was just such a good place. And I ended up there in front of that lookout. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I drove through that whole area where we spent a lot of time when we worked together. We would just go, and I was aware. Well, I was sort of aware, but not aware, Yeah. And I did that. I ended up everything sounded bad to me.
Yeah.
So after a long ass time, I finally went back to Metropolitan Market and went back inside, and I just got a salad. I made myself a salad.
So on one hand, it sounds like mild depression, because when we're depressed, we will have lack of motivation and also take no pleasure in things.
Yeah.
And if your pleasure wasn't available, and you normally would think about what would give you pleasure to eat, then you might go like, something's wrong. The other thing that comes to mind is when we, grief seemingly is very much related to attachment, obviously. And when we watch other social animals and humans included, when a young child is separated from their parents, the first thing they do is they start frantically looking around, right? And then what happens is if they can't find their parents, they start to scream and cry. hoping that their parents will hear them and come to them. If that doesn't happen, what they see, and actually Darwin noticed this as well, that eventually the animal or the human animal or the other non-human animal will shut down. And we can sometimes call this grief, or you can call it depression or something, and it's unclear why we would have evolved this process, these phases, but the idea is that at a certain point, your yelling is more likely to attract a predator than your kin, and so it's advantageous, given the length of time, for you to actually shut down. And in order to get you to shut down, your brain actually becomes depressed, and you have no motivation, and you feel no pressure, you feel no pleasure, and you just want to crawl underneath a bush and just not move. And you'll see animals do this at times when they're really past a certain phase of suffering. Stray dogs or dogs that are domesticated, but they get abandoned. You'll find them just hunkering down, and it's not just a behavior; it's a mindset that overcomes us. But it makes me wonder. It has that kind of feeling for me of searching for him.
That is very possibly the manifestation of it, of like subconsciously being like, where is he?
Yeah.
Where's Ron? And then randomly ending at places that we would have frequented in an area. Like, that's just an area that I never go to anymore. It's Redmond. It's like the Redmond area. Like Redmond, Bellevue, like that border there, like where that Fred Meyer is, and that area. And I never go there anymore. I don't have any reason to. And that's where I was driving, and it's
because it reminds you of him.
Because there would have been. It's the close, other than driving to Seattle or driving back to Tacoma. I suppose it was the closest place I could drive to that was had a physical connection from before. But it's weird because I certainly did not think of that at all. There's not a moment in my head where I was like,
well, it's not logical because you know that you can't find him.
But what you're mentioning, it feels real. Like, when I was little and my mom left, my dad tells me that which is totally obvious that this would happen, that I was always seeing my mom, being like, that's my mom. And of course he knew it wasn't, but I'd get desperate. I'm like, that's her. Like, go. Wait, where are you going? We gotta go. Because we'd be driving and like I'd see my mom or something, and there was that searching, like, which of course I couldn't drive myself, but it's like I'm imagining I was like looking around everywhere for her, So yeah, that's probably a manifestation of that, and it must be because that's why I called it weird. I was aware, I was aware, like, okay, I bet you this is not. I was saying the odds that this is unrelated to what I'm going through are really low right now. And I did, like I said, I did do some kind of soothing self-talk, through it, so that I would feel like, okay, I'm still connected to reality here. But I couldn't explain but I'm like, there's a few times where I'm like, what am I doing? Where am I? Like, not really, I knew where I was, but I'm like, where? Like, I'm lost. I felt lost. So it's very interesting that you bring that up.
But it felt important to keep looking.
It felt like, what's the word I would use? Because almost desperate, I guess. Like, I was hungry, and I need food, and I need to find something. But it's not that. Like, nothing sounded good. And when I finally went back to Met Market and I bought, it still didn't sound good. And actually, like, I think my stomach was upset all of last night. It's so weird, like, how the brain works. But yeah, it was that interesting reaction of, I guess I'm just gonna go search for the thing that I can't find. Yeah, and nothing sounds good.
Again, I'm glad that you allow yourself to do that, a lot of people, I would say majority of people, would shut themselves down. I think this is my first time observing you go through something like this, and I don't think I would have predicted this, because I think I would have predicted one that you would regress to like pre-therapy, unaware of your feelings, denying, and just trying to please everybody. But you're not doing that. It's actually the opposite. And so it gives me confidence that you'll listen to yourself. You know, what are you supposed to hear in that moment exactly? It's so confusing. It's not logical. But you went with, there's so many other things that other people would say. Like, I just forced myself to eat something and I went home because this is ridiculous. You didn't do that. You're just like, something's, wait, something's wrong. Well, keep looking. You'll find the thing. And you just kept going.
And there was one really interesting moment that I almost forgot, that, because the other thing that was in my mind is that I didn't want to eat garbage. And now I'm realizing that I was protecting myself both literally and symbolically from doing what you were just saying would be a risk, which is me regressing into unhealthy behaviors, like going on a bender, drinking bender, or in my case, maybe like, okay, you know what, screw it. My friend died. I'm just going to go eat terrible food because what's the point, or whatever, right? Or going on a spending spree, for example, right?
Or like, beating yourself up. That's, I think, the thing that a lot of people would do, in addition to those things. Yeah. But the process of just like, you just tell yourself, Berto, like, grow the fuck up and just buy something and move on with your life. Oh, right. Like you've got shit to do.
Yelling at myself internally. Yes. Instead, this moment happened, which I was very happy for. Because when I finally went back to Met Market, sort of like tail between my legs, I'm like, okay, I need food. I do need food. I remember in my head, I said, okay, if there's one thing Ron would want me to do right now is to eat healthy. And so I did. I bought myself a nice little broccoli, and like, it's just like I bought a healthy lunch, and I didn't overeat, and I ate. So I was kind of happy that I had that little conversation in my head, and that Ron helped me in that moment. It was like, literally, Ron would have been like, no, this is not an excuse for you. Eat good, eat healthy. And it was good. But it was so now that I've kind of gone through this, I'm going to relabel it. It was this necessary journey that I took that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
But that I wasn't aware that I needed it or what it was that was happening. I knew there was something related, but I didn't know what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
It is. Well, it's not
or bizarre.
Grief is as you're reminding me, it's unexpected. It's also not, it can be very intangible, as you're saying. It's like, I knew something was like, something was going on, probably related to Ron dying, but I don't know, but I'll just keep listening to what I want to do and don't want to do, and just figure it out as I go. I have a couple hours to kill anyway, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then after it's all said and done, you're just like, well, maybe it had to do it. I don't know. Was that the right thing to do? Was it the wrong? It's like hard to say. At the very least, it's good that you went with it. You didn't beat yourself up. You did, eventually get to a place where you were calling upon the higher power or the inner voice or the honoring of Ron, while also not going down a so are you saying that there was a risk there of going down a self-destruction bender of some kind?
In my past, for sure, because just before you knew me, so 2005, 2006 is when me and my wife had split up for a while.
Yeah, I met you when...
Yeah, we were split up,
yeah.
Right. But you met me at the start of the
getting back
upswing.
Together. Yeah.
But there were some really dark times before that where I wasn't aware that I fully was depressed and that I was fully dysfunctional. And what you were saying earlier, that you were thinking maybe that I would revert to pre-therapy, or I would try to be pleasing other. Yeah, I was in all like just check all the boxes, right? Like full on crazy spending behavior. I would lay in bed till like noon. I had to be at work, but I had the kind of job where I could sort of not show up. I mean, like I could make the schedule work, but I would just be in bed till noon, not enjoying my time in bed. Just like I've never been someone to stay in bed till noon, except when I was like 12 or so. I just, that's not me. And I'm not like an early riser, 5 a.m., but I don't stay in bed in depth. It was weird. And I would just sit there, just staring at the ceiling, right? Then I was completely dysfunctional at my job. I couldn't operate. And I remember my boss at the time telling me, because I shared that I was going through a split that might have been going to a divorce. And he shared that, when he got divorced, he, in his case, his distraction was to fully dive into work and just keep himself very busy. Who knows if that was healthy or not, but that was what he was telling me. I was experiencing the opposite, but it wasn't just work, everything. I was just I was being completely dysfunctional. Now I wasn't, luckily I wasn't resorting to drugs or alcohol at home by myself or something, and I didn't feel at all suicidal or anything, but I was being completely,
yeah. And I was around, shortly after, and everything you're telling me isn't surprising to me, but I just want to highlight, I think maybe we talked about this on the phone that one night, but that you've come so far.
Yeah.
Like it's less than 2 weeks since Ron died, but there are some signs here, of the stories that you're telling, and the spontaneity and the allowance you're giving yourself, and the lack of the benders or whatever. The feeling that you're showing, the authenticity when I see you at my birthday party, and I'm just like, how are you doing? And you're just like, oh, I mean, there's like so many feelings and thoughts that you were having in the moment, and
right.
It's just,
and so
it's way beyond. You're like a different person.
I think there is something to that, and I think, but so along with that, I think it's both not surprising and it is right that you would have those concerns, because that is what would have happened to me for most of my life, especially like if this had happened during that time frame, forget about it, right? Like, because I was already dealing with enough. But even if this had happened, I think a decade ago.
Yeah, right. I was just thinking that if this was 10 years ago, I think you would still be in that codependent mode, over-functioning mode, and you would be frantically running around trying to solve his son's problems and his mom's problems and his girlfriend's problems, and you would be sacrificing yourself on the altar of over-functioning. Yeah. And you, in fact, I won't go into specifics, because I don't think either one of us want to out anyone, but there was a necessary moment of going to his place, and it was a convergence of a number of interested parties, and the day after, I think, and there was
high stress
and conflict. And when you were telling me about it, I was like, oh no, like, how are you doing?
Right.
And you were like, actually, for myself, it kind of helped in a way. I didn't get entangled. I was there, but I just, this isn't my problem. And I was like, whoa, really?
It was really weird. I gotta say, it was very, I keep saying weird.
Weird's fine.
But I mean something else. Well, what happened is I didn't want to go. This was basically me going, I'm not going to tell the whole story because same reason. I'm not going to name names or anything. But I was going to go to Ron's apartment to help, because you have to move stuff. You have to deal with the physical stuff that's left behind. And I didn't want to do it. I felt scared, and I didn't want to be in his apartment. I didn't know how I was going to react. It just felt scary to me. Like, it made it feel real. It's his place, and he's not there, and I can't.
And he was found in his apartment.
And he was found in his apartment. And so there's a lot of reasons why I didn't want to go. But I was going to go because I felt like, yeah, I'll help out. I will do that. And so I was mostly worried on the way there. I was like, okay, I need to be calm. Because I quite literally, I was worried I was going to have an anxiety or a panic attack.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was like doing self work, like, okay, this is okay. And I wasn't the weird thing going there is I wasn't feeling it. And you would think with all my thyroid level stuff and what, I wasn't, because sometimes I can start feeling the stress even before I feel the stress. I wasn't. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I was mostly like just doing prep work. When I got there, I didn't even have a time to process being at the apartment because immediately it was chaos. And so what I was saying is that it gave me this job to do of like not adding chaos to the chaos. And so what I did is pretty much try to just, I was talking to people about memory, happy memories, the happy times and things, and trying to keep people distracted. And I felt okay with it. And I thought I felt terrible for the people involved and that there was drama on top of tragedy. But I didn't feel it was my place to solve, nor that I could have solved it. I couldn't have, there's nothing I could have done to solve it other than I was trying to minimize the damage by, like I said, keeping people distracted on positive things.
Yeah. And that's just so, I'm just very proud of you that you could do that. Cause
you're right. There's
before you would have just
billion ways
sacrificed yourself.
And I still wouldn't have been able to do it, but I'm just saying I would have been, So, and in the end, I was, like I said, I was very sad for what was happening and everything, but I didn't end up having a panic attack, and I didn't go home all stressed or anything. I was okay, I did have a couple moments at the apartment where I, of course, inevitably, I was like, oh man, like, I remember the last time I was there with him and, stuff like that. So, yeah. Yeah. But I'm glad I have tools, and I'm glad that I had the therapy. I'm glad that I've had this podcast. I'm glad that I've had years of processing because, it does give one tools to handle life's changes. And there's more changes coming because, I have more loss to come. My grandparents are very old now, and heck, I have another friend right now in the hospital in Colombia. And,
Yeah.
So these tools are necessary.
Yeah. Along those lines, all of our parents are in the general age range of, it could be next year, it could be 15 years from now, but it's in the near future ish, and it's, for people our age, if we were 10 years old or 15 years old or 15 years younger, it wouldn't all be happening at the same time.
Yeah.
But it will all start happening in all likelihood all at the same time.
Yeah, it'll feel, especially since time is compressed for us now.
Yeah.
The older you get, time seems to go faster.
Yeah.
Even if there's a year in between things, it'll feel really proximal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, my parents are 80, what are they, 81, 82-ish or something, and it's just, or wait, 81 and 80 and anyway, 81-ish.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy for people is like 75, 78. So they're already above the curve in terms of statistics.
Right.
I just have to.
Same with my dad.
And so it's like they seem healthy, everything seems fine, but he's just like, well, God knows, right? Things take a turn, and so it's weird for me because I've had people and very close pets die, which has given me a glimpse of the future, but the kinds of losses that I'm likely to experience over the next 10 years, 20 years is way beyond anything that I can possibly imagine. I have been so lucky and fortunate in so many ways, including this, that there's so little death in my life. Yeah. It's just like, you talk to anyone else and they'll say like, wow, you really, the universe has protected you in so many ways. Yeah. And I worry about my soul. Like, people sometimes like, oh, Kirk, you're strong. I'm like, so, well, I haven't really been put to the test in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I had gone a long stretch of my life without close loss.
Yeah.
I lost both of my paternal grandparents a long time ago.
And you were close to them.
I was super close. My grandma basically was my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she died in 2000. So that's 24 years ago. And my grandpa died in like 93 or 94. So 30 years ago.
But sometimes I think that's kind of different because, one, they were declining for a while.
Yeah.
And also you had moved up to the States and had maybe grieved it halfway already. Also, when we're in our 20s, which is when around the time, I think our brains just can't really, and not to denigrate 20-somethings, but
it's true.
I think that like my dog that I grew up with, Pfeffer, she was my dog.
Yeah.
And I was very close to her. And when she died, I don't know, it was 30 years ago, but I don't remember having any kind of reaction.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I was 22 or whatever, or 20, and I was just focused on the chaos of college life. And I feel, to this day, I feel guilty for just like, so wait, because, and again, not to denigrate even myself when I was 20, but I feel like the older we get, the more you feel reality more, I guess, is the way.
I think that's right. Look, my grandpa, absolutely. I was there in Colombia when he had already declined so far.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of mental preparation in that sense. Now, I still, of course, was very sad. My grandma was a little different. Yes, she had Alzheimer's. Yes, she had declined. But it didn't hit me right away. But about a decade later, I was really feeling the loss of her.
Maybe that's what I should say. It's not that when we're younger we can't, and I'm generalizing. It's of course this high variability here. It's just that I think when we get older, hopefully we have more wisdom and also more self-awareness to actually turn toward what our bodies want us to do, which is to grieve, and to recognize how life fucking sucks sometimes. Right. Whereas at least for me, when I was 20, I think I just glossed over and said, well, where's the next fun adventure? Because that's where I'm oriented. Yeah, totally. And I was unaware of how, because, it to this day, Pfeffer dying affects me. So it obviously affected me then, but I just, anyway, so,
So I also went through a period of time where no one close to me died. Then in the last few years, it started happening with the older guard in Colombia, folks that were my grandparents' brothers and sisters who were younger than the ones that had passed away. They all started passing away, right? So now it got to the point where on my dad's side, none of the grandparent generation was left, right? All of them had gone. And that felt weird in itself. Like, oh, wow, like all of those people are now gone. In my dad and his brothers and sister, they're still there, but they're getting older. My dad's the second oldest. They're getting older.
Yeah.
Now, whatever. And then on my mom's side, I lost an uncle when I was very little, like 7. But since then, everyone's still there.
Right.
But I know it's coming. It's just coming. And to your point, I guess maybe because we've been blessed with a lot of people sticking around for a long time, it's maybe gonna feel harder because all of a sudden a lot of them drop at near the same time.
Yeah. And dear listener, I guess get ready for us to have a lot of episodes of this sort, whether if we feel like it. Which I'm guessing at the very least it'll come up.
Yeah.
But there's a chance that it'll come up, and it might come up a lot. I'm sort of thinking into the future. I haven't really ever thought about this, but so I don't know why I'm saying that, but I guess I'm just anyway. I in summary, I'm sad that he's gone. I'm also sad for what could have been just even before he went.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different losses, not just that he died, but also just like
a lot of lost times.
All the happiness that he could have, and his health that he could have had, and the life that he could have had, because he from my vantage point would get something going, and then everything would fall apart, and then he'd get something going, and then everything would fall apart.
In his field, he ended up being really, really good. He was very successful in spite of all the setbacks, because he was very good at what he did.
Yeah.
And he could have.
He was, well, like, you're successful in a lot of ways. I'm successful in a lot of ways. He was just like us.
Yeah.
And if he didn't have this trauma and this self-medicating, God fucking knows where he'd be. In fact, he probably would have been the CEOs and all that kind of shit. Especially with all the people that he knew, like the investors he probably would have.
So I got to be clear about one thing. Like, in his field, he was better and enjoyed his field more than I do mine. And like, I actually don't work on what like my true passion and calling might be. I am good at what I do, but he loved what he did, and he was really good. It was just like a natural gift of what he had. It was well matched with what he wanted to do. It wasn't immediate. He took a long time to find what he was good at and wanted to do. But when he found it, he was. So yeah, it sucks because he kind
of plateaued 20 years ago and could never, and not only just career wise, but relationship wise, like just think like, family and suburbia and also like, it's kind of a weird thing that he never came on the podcast, because we talked about it, especially in the early days.
Yeah.
Because he was a talker and he had a lot of opinions, and we even for a bit there were seriously talking about making a podcast.
Yeah, I know.
Because of who he was and his dynamic and the conversations that the three of us would have, and the jokes and the laughter and the adventures that we could tell and all that, anyway, it's a loss for me in a lot of ways. I can't imagine what you're going through and people close to him. And on behalf of the listeners, I want to appreciate you putting it out there. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it. You came over today, and as I was starting to record, I just said, so you want to talk about Ron, or because if you don't want to, that's fine.
Right.
And you're just like, yeah, okay.
No, I think I definitely did. I didn't know how soon or whatever, but I definitely did, because This podcast is a huge part of my life. I've been doing it for a very long time. In fact, basically as long as his struggles lasted, I think.
Yeah.
But anyways, I definitely wanted to, I like I said, the three main reasons, just speak about what a big impact he had for me and what a great friend he was when he was my friend.
Yeah, and it would have been fine if you would have said this, but I could see you saying, yeah, eventually I want to talk about it, but I'm not, I'm too raw. I don't know where I'll go.
Right.
So I'd rather just not. So I just want to, to lead by example, to be vulnerable, to be open, to share yourself with the listeners. Yeah. I think, it's a big deal.
I might end up making it a habit of interjecting little Ron anecdotes when we do episodes, like, nothing incriminating, just, Ron anecdotes, memories. To your point, to honor, just keep things alive. Plus, a lot of relevant stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, everyone out there, take care of yourself. Because
not only do you deserve it, but buddy, if you're out there somehow tuning into the frequencies, you definitely deserved it. And you deserve it now more than ever. So I hope I hope you are out there surfing the galaxy in some way. So take care of yourself because you deserve it.